16,000 hours is about how much time the average American student spends inside of an educational institution from the time they put on their backpacks and skip off to kindergarten to the time they graduate 12th grade and burn all their books and never think about it again. And we know how quickly those hours pass. We don't see how life-changing they are in the moment. We get caught up in the scramble of just getting through the next day, just getting through the next book, the next test, and we lose sight of how enormous the investment is that we're making just one step at a time. And of course, in our American culture, it's also too easy to hear a number like that and lament how inadequate the results are at the end of those 16 hours. But we don't have time for that tonight, and if you're here in the room, you already have heard the news and you're seeking a better option. When we hear this number, I think a better response is to take stock, to step back and take stock of the immense resource that God has given us, which are the formative years of our children, and to consider how best to invest those years. Or, to put it another way, a child's favorite question, why? Why are we spending all this time educating our children, and what should the proper end of that education be? Do our children just need good technical skills and vocational skills and STEM skills so that they can get a good job and be a good engineer? Do they need to be taught how to read big books so they can get into the elite universities and get into the top of society? How we answer these questions will depend on how we define what man is, what a human is, what our children are. Are they just material creatures who need to gain pragmatic survival skills? Are they essentially good creatures, and if they just got a good education, then they wouldn't do bad things and they'd keep being good? There was a writer in the 15th century named John Amos Comenius. We alluded to him earlier. And as he was writing about education, he said this: "It is evident then that the ultimate end of man is eternal happiness with God. Since that is the end to which this life is leading, our actions on this earth should aim towards eternity." Comenius, as he's writing about this, he compares our spiritual growth in this life, as compared with our eternal life, to the development of a child in the womb. So we're developing in this life for our life in eternity. Education is an essential part of this preparation for eternity. It's not just a side quest. It's not just something we do because we need to get a job. Man is a reasoning creature. God has made us rulers over creation, and we are creatures, as he puts it, which are the image and joy of our Creator. And so because of that, it is a foundational task of humanity, of our growth as human beings, to, as we said before, know oneself and with oneself all things. And I know that sounds like a tall task, but we'll do our best. And to exercise power over all things and over ourselves, most importantly. And to refer ourselves and all things to God, which is the source of all. And so if this is our task as humans, the education of human beings should reflect that. And as Ben mentioned earlier, our crest reflects that with the word doctrina representing knowledge. This is our desire to know ourselves and all things in Christ, and that's represented by the open book. Virtus, our desire to seek virtue, which is primarily ruling ourselves well, and that's represented by the laurel crown. And pietas, piety, which is the directing of ourselves primarily toward God, focusing ourselves toward God, and that's represented by the morning star of Christ. This is why education is not merely knowledge transfer. It's not just a data dump. It's most importantly about forming the virtue of a person. It is shaping them to not just know the truth, but to love what is true. Proverbs 2:6-7 says, "For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk in integrity." So we see a prerequisite for sound wisdom is righteousness. A prerequisite for true knowledge is virtue. And so all of what we do in education should be to those ends of forming knowledge, virtue, and piety. When we use the words Christ-centered, even, when we use the words classical to describe our curriculum, we're not pursuing a method because of its prestige or whatever we may attach to it, but because we believe that those tracks best serve the goals of inspiring piety, forming virtue, and imparting knowledge. So then how do we put this vision of education into practice? What does a classroom look like, and what are the students doing all day? In short, how does one form virtue in a child? There's a lot more to unpack there than we can unpack in one evening, but a good place to start with that is with a book. Right now, I'm reading a book called The Secret Garden. I just happened to be reading it with my son as part of our homeschooling. And so it was fresh on my mind, and so I'm going to use this as an example. At the core of our curriculum is a focus on literature, on reading and discussing great stories as a way to integrate and expand all of the areas of knowledge that we study. Charlotte Mason, like John talked about, spoke of this idea as living books, books which shape the imagination and the affection of a child. This little book is a really simple book. Kids love it. It's just a happy little book. It's about a 9-year-old British girl, Mary Lennox, who is living in India with her parents. She is sickly, spoiled, and she is quite certain that the entire universe revolves around her. Her parents then both die of the plague, and she goes back to England to live with a reclusive uncle on the Yorkshire moors, a place that is wonderfully new to her. There she meets a cousin of the same age named Karlin, and if there's any person in the world more self-centered and obnoxious than her, it is Karlin. He is convinced that he is deathly ill. His mother has also died. He has convinced himself to be bedridden, and he's also convinced that the entire world revolves around him. He rules this entire manor with his temper tantrums. And in some very funny scenes, this little girl, Mary's insistence on getting her own way wakes him up to his own self-centeredness, and they begin both to grow in humility and to discover the beauty of the created world around them, rather than having a myopic focus on their own needs. This growth plays out in metaphor and actuality by their discovery of a secret garden, which together they work to bring back to life. By the end of the book, they have both taken their eyes off their own perceived weakness and illness and become strong, healthy, kind, thankful children, full of life and wonder. And that's the book. And it's a very simple book, and kids love it, and it has a happy ending. But you can draw a whole world of virtue, knowledge, and piety out of this as you read this with children. Right at the beginning, we begin to learn many things about a culture that we have never experienced. This teaches children that the world is bigger than their own experience. As the book describes Mary and her surroundings, students are invited to ask and imagine, what is it like to be an English child? What would it be like to live in India? It's really hot all the time. The teacher incorporates history by helping her students to understand why this English family was living in India. The book explains that her father served in the English government. What did England's rule of colonial India mean for both countries? Why does Mary interact with the natives the way she does? And so on. And we make these connections to the history that the children are learning. Throughout the book, many connections can be made to theology. Why is it that Mary and Karlin are so self-centered and care for no one and no thing other than themselves? Why is that wrong? Why is that not a good thing? How are their lives orchestrated throughout the book in such a way that they begin to change? How can our students change in similar ways? Do they see this same self-centeredness in themselves, maybe? Children also grow in their understanding of literature as a subject as the teacher draws their attention to metaphors, to word pictures, to plot structures. Their vocabulary grows as they hear Karlin described as behaving like a Raja, and they pause to learn what a raja is. They copy beautiful phrases from the book to strengthen their writing, and the wonder and the beauty they hear described in the book forms their souls toward art. To round out the summary of this little example, I'd like to read a passage from the book. As Karlin begins to change, the book describes him reaching this point where he realizes he is going to live. He's not going to be deathly ill for the rest of his life. And he even says, "I'm going to live forever, aren't I?" The author says this: "One of the strange things about living in the world is that it is only now and then one is quite sure one is going to live forever and ever and ever. One knows it sometimes when one gets up at the tender, solemn dawn time and goes out and stands alone and throws one's head far back and looks up and watches the pale sky slowly changing and flushing and marvelous unknown things happening until the east almost makes one cry out and one's heart stands still at the strange, unchanging majesty of the rising of the sun, which has been happening every morning for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. One knows it then for a moment or so." And the teacher asks her classroom, "Have you ever felt that wonder? Have you ever felt that sense of eternity in your soul? Do you feel it as you read those words? What does it mean that God has placed eternity in the hearts of man? What can we learn about how we should live our lives as we consider how short our life is and how long eternity is? When we feel this wonder, we are finally shaken out of this trance that we far too often live in, and we know that the world is more than just stuff. It is more than just random atoms bouncing around. God is holding the world together. He's breathing the world every single second, and we know that because the sun comes up every single morning. The flowers open every single morning. The dew falls every single morning. This sense of wonder, communicated through story, is powerful for children. If I could just share briefly from my own life, I remember when I was a young one, my mother read to me nearly every night for many, many years, and that was incredibly formative for me. And I'm sure many of you can relate to the way those childhood stories that you heard when you were just a kid, they stick with you and they shape your whole life. This sense of wonder from living stories forms a sense of Godwardness deeper in a child than any logical syllogism could ever reach. So from this one simple book, and maybe you're thinking that's just a little too simple, and it is. But we've made connections to every subject that we're studying. We've strengthened every subject that we're studying. We've made connections between different subject areas. And in this way, these living books form the heart of the curriculum. As children learn to deeply question and investigate timeless literature, they are invited into the great conversation that John talked about, of authors who have wrestled with the great ideas of humanity for thousands of years in ways that have stood the test of time and that still speak to us in a powerful way today. But, lest you're thinking that we only read happy books about happy children, we will also read meaty books. As students mature into junior high and high school, they'll wrestle with ever more mature and complex books like Frankenstein, Animal Farm, The Odyssey, Pride and Prejudice, Paradise Lost, Up from Slavery, and Pilgrim's Progress, just to name a few. And with every book, they'll ask these questions. They'll interrogate the book. They'll say, how can this form me? How does this inform my life? Our typical teacher will be tasked with guiding this kind of integrated learning in the classroom, primarily through an exploration of timeless literature and overseeing several related subject areas such as history and theology. Of course, there's a little more to it than just reading storybooks in the classroom. Students will also explore math, science, and nature, primarily through hands-on learning that focuses on a connection between conceptual ideas and reality. For example, in mathematics, they'll learn what is the connection between this squiggle that we write on the page and the quantity 5 through hands-on objects, through learning what does this sign represent in the real world. They will also memorize timelines and facts as they build a cohesive view of history that integrates both the Bible and outside sources. They will grow in their knowledge of God through memorization of Scripture and catechisms. They will strengthen their language skills through Latin, logic, and rhetoric. Their writing and art will be regularly practiced. They will grow in wonder and worship as they learn to sing well together. Our entire school, the way the curriculum will be built, will cycle through a yearly cycle of 4 time periods. They'll cover ancient, medieval, pre-modern, and modern. And so over a course of a K through 12 education, each child will go through that cycle approximately 3 times and build on that every time they go through. The beauty of this model, paired with the collaborative approach, where students are at home 2 days a week, they're in school 3 days a week, is that your 3rd grader will be reading an abridged version of, say, the Epic of Gilgamesh, while your 8th grader is reading the real Epic of Gilgamesh. And you as a parent can say, well, I've never read the Epic of Gilgamesh. I think I'll pick it up and read it too. And then the real learning happens, not in the classroom, but around the dinner table, as your younger children and your older children and you discuss this text, discuss this ancient text that is not in the Bible. It's not the Bible, but it informs our understanding of history. It informs our understanding of the Bible. It informs our understanding of God, and it helps us to understand His world more fully. Each classroom will integrate 2 to 3 grades, and we believe that this model allows each child to grow at a more natural pace. Not every child just exactly progresses from 1 to 2 to 3. Some of them grow a little slower, some of them grow a little faster. We also, frankly, have a lot of homeschoolers in our mix who may be all over the map with where they're at in different subjects. And so this allows us to place students at their skill level. This also allows students to just naturally learn both to follow well, as they may be the youngest in a classroom, and then to begin to learn to lead well as they grow towards being the oldest kid in the classroom, and develop empathy and social skills as they relate to students older than themselves and younger than themselves, and learn how to help each other grow and learn, rather than being placed in an artificially enforced age bracket. Students will also have the ability to progress at faster paces if they excel in certain areas. We will also require uniforms. As with the curriculum choices, this is not an arbitrary choice. This is not just because we think uniforms look cool. Uniforms serve our purpose of education by contributing to a well-ordered environment where kids can learn well together. They also remove the temptation for students to compare themselves and find out who's wearing the cool clothes right now and how do I get the cool clothes, and treat someone differently based on their appearance. So to restate our vision, we have sought in every way, as we consider the structure of what this school is, for every component of education to serve the end of forming the heart, the soul, and the mind of our students. In every classroom, our aim is for our children to grow in knowledge, in virtue, and in piety.